Let's do.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Future Tech Banker. I'm Jack Hubbard, Chief Experience Officer and Chairman of St. Meyer and Hubbard. Alec Crawford with Veripath is with us also. And today, we're really excited. This is my third time interviewing Jill Castilla. I learned something new from Jill every day. And I was saying before we got started, Jill is the community banker's community banker, whether it's Herd on Herd, which her bank sponsors a couple of times a year, where they've had as many as 55,000 people in little city Edmond, Oklahoma, and a bank that Jill took over when it was not doing well. Let's just give it the best spin we possibly can. And she's turned it into an absolute juggernaut. She is an award-winning banker. She is involved with the ABA, the ICBA. She's a graduate of GSB, Graduate School of Banking. And one of the things I love about Jill, because she's a military brat and involved in the military, so are her kids, is that Jill and the bank developed a program called Roger, which we're going to talk about today, which is really a digital bank focused on the military. Jill, we are absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You know, Alec, we could go on and on about Jill's bio. One of the other things that you need to know is Mark Cuban is probably going to come up in this conversation because Jill had a very successful run of PPP with Mark. But take it away, Alec. Let's get started.
Yeah, well, we were talking about taking over a community bank in crisis, right? And I think that's something that many of our listeners will be familiar with, especially you think about the 2008, the global banking crisis, and you literally took this small bank and transformed it into one of America's most innovative community banks. So what were the pivotal items that allowed you to do that? What was the critical things that you did there, Jill?
So whenever I came on board, we had just had a Federal Reserve examination, and it uncovered that they were bumping the due dates of loans without collecting interest. And so we thought we had a credit situation to deal with, and that was basically all. Whenever I came in, though, and started looking at the financials of the bank, we found rampant fraud, and that the operational condition of the bank was in worse condition than even the credit quality. So over the course of about 2 years, lost $12 million in capital, mainly because of the credit issues, but they just weren't overseeing proper draw procedures and things like that. And then we had millions of dollars that have been siphoned away by fraud, by some pretty revered members of our team that have been here for 30, 40 years. And so, at first it was trying to clean it up and get us back on financial stability. But I took such a reputational hit in some of the changes that we had to make because we couldn't be really transparent with the team what was happening. That was a big lesson I learned, was to be transparent, even if you in the face of potential criticism for doing so. But it took a while before they trusted me. And so the bank is owned primarily by an employee stock ownership program. So I think the first moment where we were able to have some change was the stock valuation that we get once a year. The stock value went from $51 a year per share to $9 per share in just 1 year. So our team, was real defensive, crossing arms, really doubting why we were having to make these drastic changes. But the first time when it hit their 401k, then everybody would start really paying attention that, wow, what I do affects the bottom line of the bank. It affects my brothers and sisters with the same retirement plan. And that this isn't just some rich person that is taking a hit because of this inappropriate kind of activities happening at the bank. It was everyone sitting beside me. And so that really helped everyone start paying attention. And then whenever we received, we were a part of a pilot program with the Fed that although our ratings were lower, we were able to get a higher management rating and be removed from a written agreement. And that also then helped us get some more favorable pricing with vendors. So a big change. Whenever we were kind of certified as being turned around, we ended up selling our branches. And that was really the tipping point to say, okay, we're going to really be focused on the future. Our board said, we've been here for 100 plus years. We want to be here for 100 more. That made me want to stay. It made members of our team want to stay, to think about what can you build for generations based upon this legacy of this really revered, longstanding community bank.
Your bank is under $1 billion, and there are so many community banks of your size in America. Community banking lags behind in a lot of areas. I think we're very wary as community bankers to make sure that we don't jump into something that's not going to last. AI is certainly one of those things that's going to be around. You are not a laggard. You have decided to take the bull by the horns and really proact to AI and innovation and digital. Talk about why. What was the tipping point that you said, well, geez, our bank has got to do this? And what advice would you give to community bank presidents who are still wondering if AI is something they ought to tackle?
We're so fortunate that we're privately held, so we don't have to manage to quarter by quarter. We're managing for the next century. What's the next generation of our customers, our shareholders? What are they going to expect from us? And so having a longer view is the first thing that really helps things in our favor. I think also, we understand we're in the best educated community in Oklahoma, one of the most affluent communities in Oklahoma. We're the oldest bank in Oklahoma County and the Oklahoma City Metro. And so we know that there's high expectations out there. And one of the biggest challenges we have is overcoming the perception that community banks are out of date or lagging behind. In most cases, what we see is that we're not. And then we have the tools to be able to plug in the most relevant technology possible and to be able to compete with the big guys and the customer experiences that generations of customers expect now. I think COVID really pushed us all to where every generation is now focused on having good digital banking. And so we all have to do that now. So part of it is overcoming just the perception that a community bank can't be not only keeping pace with what the larger institutions do, what even credit unions do, but that we can be ahead of it. So our bank, we hold a patent. So we have a basically small business ATM that we developed and it's operationalized in 2 locations, which became really popular during COVID. I think what benefited us too is that we had this kind of failure is not an option mentality when we were in the turnaround. But when we came out of that and we decided that we wanted to be here for another 100 years, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to work with customers on collaborating to develop new interfaces and new tools and new products and services. And it's so amazing because with a small community bank, you have the grace of customers where they'll let you innovate with them. Whereas like a JP Morgan Chase or someone that's much larger doesn't have that same level of grace. And so, saying that we wanted to be innovative, that we wanted to be relevant, getting a team that was that could build versus just acknowledge the checklist every day and get the checklist done. Rebuilding a team was integral. Rebuilding systems that could be automated was something we had to do, and then the infrastructure to facilitate that. And then encouraging experimentation with AI, knowing that we need to have certain parameters in place so that we don't erode any customer confidence, but that let's learn this as an individual first. And then as we kind of play around with the different tools, what can then become more relevant. And then you're able to speak with language whenever your third-party vendors are able to integrate AI to help you in some way. We're seeing lots of opportunities down the road. It's not the time, I don't think, for some technologies to be integrated into the banking ecosystem, but you have to be aware what those emerging technologies are and having expectations of how they can be integrated into the future.
Said the magic words, artificial intelligence, and like everybody's talking about it. And up until a couple of months ago, it was all about, well, what cool stuff can we do, and how can this help us? And then Mythos happened, right? And Scott Besson meeting with the top banks saying, "Whoa, there's a problem here, and you guys really need to fix it. Don't get hacked." So obviously, look, there's lessons from leading through crisis that you learned. It may not be a crisis today, but what I've heard, and this may or may not be accurate, but Mythos is obviously a new model. It's only being released through Project Glasswing to very limited, very large companies, software companies, banks. But by August, some of the open source models may be just as good, right? And then the threat actors can do today what only a handful of people can do. Within a few days, they discovered 2,000 security flaws across all kinds of different software. So let's think about crises, resilience, risk management, and AI. And how should you think about that as a community banker?
For us, it requires that your team has to be very well educated, and you have to have a culture where you're willing to debate and that you can't be resistant to being challenged. And so for us, our culture is being kind of this combination between the book's extreme ownership and radical candor. So as you're talking about topics, encouraging everyone to get well educated, giving them the tools and access to do that in a safe space. And then whenever there is a challenge, whether that's a virus or if it's a breach from a security standpoint, or if it's personnel type of issues, or even something in the local community, being able to get everyone around the table, knowing that this is an open debate, that we want to be highly engaged, we want to be able to take like opposite views and put each other in one another's shoes to help us to either correct an issue, overcome a challenge, or better yet, be predictive of what potential challenges could happen. The desktop exercises that we do, they're getting more and more creative. And I think that that's also important, that as you see another bank or financial institution, or even outside the industry, a challenge that emerges, being able to then workshop that with a team as soon as possible, so you can figure out how you would address the situation, even though it may not be an immediate threat. I think for community banks, we've been using third-party vendors for so long because that's really the only way that we can remain competitive. And I think that will serve us very well in these future challenges, because we're used to having a lot of different voices at the table. We're used to working with experts rather than having to totally cultivate that expertise internally. And I think that will really serve us well. I'm super excited about where AI can fill some gaps for community banks. And I think that will help level the playing field with the larger institutions, especially as we achieve some economies of scale, and that we're able to also debate even more fully outside of just the traditional team that would normally be brought to the table and your third-party vendors. So it's an exciting time. I think with quantum computing, with AI, and the threats are, the clear and present danger is here. But I think because we're such experts from the human to human aspect, I think that's really going to serve community banks well going into the future.
You talk about desktop exercises, human beings. This all smacks to me of training. Jill, you've got X number of employees. How do you, as you bring AI in, as you bring new tools in, I'm curious how you get your bankers up to speed on how to use this new tool or these new tools?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's difficult because we can't really just have like one training day a year, which we do, an intensive training day once a year, and that be it. You can't just check the box. This is where my Army training really comes into play. So whenever you had downtime in the Army, you had hip pocket training. So whoever was kind of learning something or had some expertise or even just had their book handy, you would start doing just a little training exercise in that gap of time when there's downtime. And so for us, it's really having these learning moments continuously. So there's an opportunity to talk about AI, and it's just in the lobby with our tellers, then we're doing that. We're asking what they're hearing, how are they using tools in their personal life, and then welcoming those questions. We just had we do a monthly employee team meeting where we basically do a shareholders report, since we are primarily owned by the team through the employee stock ownership program. And that's also a way in which we're able to talk about how we're adjusting technology and inviting questions. We also once a month do a fireside chat where our team can ask anonymous questions or questions in person. And that really brings a lot of these challenges to right into light that may be a little intimidating, not even like wondering how the bank could answer, having some type of risk with asking a question, but sometimes that risk of not knowing fully about a technology, but wanting to be curious how the bank is responding to it. We'll have questions about AI or different legislative moves or administrative changes that could affect the bank. And so then we're able to have an open dialogue. I think it's really important as a leader to demonstrate that you're learning and that you're challenging yourself to grow and learn these kind of more difficult, whether it's data analysis and using machine learning or leveraging AI for different attributes of the bank or different services that the bank might have. And once you're showing some vulnerability there by saying that you're learning and seeking growth, then the team wants to do that as well. And it becomes more of the team is learning and growing collectively. And then it's more of an animal, living thing rather than just being like an exercise that we do.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And look, during the financial crisis, as Jack hinted at earlier, your work gained national attention, including from Mark Cuban. So tell us a little bit about that and how it revealed the power of community banking.
It was such an interesting experience. We were really trying to hustle. All the community banks were to assist our communities. And this was really early. This was before PPP. It was when the CARES Act was being developed. There was some money that was being sent to all American families, but it was slow coming. It was going to take several weeks before the Treasury could get the checks to American families. And so Mark Cuban tweeted out that he wanted to work with the FDIC insured institution to think about how to get this money to American families faster. And back then, we were really engaged with social media from the very beginning. I think we were probably the first bank out on social media, and I was really engaged as the CEO, trying to actually repair the reputation of the bank and change our search engine optimization by using social media. But through that, really got to know kind of the godfathers of community banking, but also financial technology. And so whenever Mark Cuban tweeted that, my phone blew up and said, "This has to be you, Jill." And so they were responding to Mark Cuban. I responded to him. And then a member of our community, our fintech community, said that they had his email address. I wasn't getting a response from Cuban, even though I provided my cell phone on our Twitter exchange. And so I sent an email to him, and then I was able to pitch him kind of really Shark Tank style, what I thought we could do to help American families. And that was on Thursday. And by Monday, we had the system in place. And it was really a great lesson in utilizing your network to solve problems, that you don't have to solve all the problem yourself. Mark wanted one bank to solve the problem for their customers, and then he would challenge the rest of the financial system to do the same with their customers. And we had 300 plus federal credit unions and banks that reached out to us that copied that program. And then later, when PPP was released, that we were trying to really help and match make small businesses with community banks in their area. So we were serving our community here, and we could have capitalized on it and just done all those PPP loans ourselves, but we really thought this was a great opportunity for all of community banking. So found, folks in upstate New York that were willing to help small businesses, and in New York City, we had little deserts of banks where Chicago, San Diego, Miami, where there should have been community banks available, and there wasn't very many even in that geography. So trying to find this matchmaking, and Cuban was very supportive of us while we were doing this, very encouraging for our bank to continue doing these types of activities. We're having a lot of offline conversations, and also doing some matchmaking with some technology providers that proved out to be very fruitful for our bank later on. But what happened then was the PPP program, the forgiveness program came out, and we knew how difficult it was for these small businesses even to just go through the PPP loan program. But now it was so important to get forgiveness, and the application was like 12 pages long. It was super complicated. And so that's where Cuban reached out and said, would I be willing to lead an effort to do an automated forgiveness tool for our non-customers, for the rest of kind of American customers that were mainly had loans that were originated with financial technology companies. And those technologies, once they collected the referral fee or the agent fee, they popped smoke and were gone and nowhere to be found. And so these small businesses were left not having an advisor for their PPP forgiveness. So in 10 days, we partnered with Tesla, we partnered with the FTLD registry to get the .bank URL, and then Mark footed the entire bill. And within those 10 days, we developed a guided application to be able to get to the PDF form where the small business could then print off and then provide to their lender for forgiveness. That served 250,000 businesses. The first week we had it deployed, we got tens of millions of dollars offered to us to sell the information related to those businesses, and refused to do so. This was a great grab of file information and business information that was being sold by a lot of the financial technology companies that were participating in PPP. And it was also like a really great moment for our team to know, we're not going to sell customer information, even if it would double the capital of our bank. And then we knew it also kind of like forged and solidified the mission that we had for the communities that we serve, but also to be a leader among community banks, to show them the way, to kind of have the machete and clear the path that might be difficult to follow, so that other community banks could follow us to show how we serve our communities in crisis.
Yeah, and as you listen to Jill, and I've interviewed her 3 times now, one of the things you'll notice about Jill, she's very innovative. Technology is not a barrier for Jill. It's an opportunity. But every filter that you, when you hear an answer, it's all about the customer. How will this work for our customer? And I think a lot of that is lost. When we get hundreds of AI stuff all the time, every day. But a lot of it is lost because the focus isn't on the customer, it's on inside the bank. And Chris Nichols is going to be our guest in a couple of weeks. And one of the things that he brings to the table in his writings is, what does this mean for the customer? Here's where I'm going with this. A number of years ago, Jill said, there's a customer segment out there that is not being well served. And I, Jill, know that because I was in the military. And I know that the suffering that military families have when their banking situation is unstable and not good. So Jill's bank gets started, and Jill and her team get started on this thing called Roger. I'm curious, Jill, 2 things. Talk about Roger a little bit, and what was the catalyst for that? And since we're talking about AI and technology and situations like that, what kind of technology have you put into Roger to help these military families?
Thank you for that question. It's been, just a delight of a career to be able to give back to a community that built me. So when I enlisted at 19, I was living in a little storage unit behind my father's house, and didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity, and I was working at the local grocery store trying to earn my way back into college. My parents didn't understand financial aid, and so I was trying to pay for it on my own and carry groceries out for an Army recruiter who told me I could be an independent student if I enlisted and went to AIT. And so I filled out the direct deposit form whenever I enlisted to have my money direct deposit Citizens Bank of Edmond, funny enough. And I went off to basic and AIT. I thought I had saved up about $15,000 after being away for a while. I was just living on our substance allowance that we get while you're in training. And I went to the local women's store because I had bulked up. The Army likes to carve you up. And so I was ready for some new clothes to go back to college. And a close family member took me shopping with them, and I wrote a check for a couple $100. And then I got a notice that I was overdrawn. And all the money was gone. I found my return, or the checks that used to come back to you in all my statements, and that they saw that this close family member had written checks on my account the entire time. Well, I told that story during COVID to our local university. I was part of a bigger story, but just kind of where you come from. And I really had never shared that to that detail. And a young lady came up to me and was also, a sophomore in college, kind of similar age to what I was back then, and said that my story was her story, that she could not open an account because she was under 18 on her own. And so she had to have her mom on her account, and then her mom had a garnishment, so that all the money was gone. And at the same time, Jeffrey Kendall from Nimbus reached out to me and was offered us an opportunity for a digital bank at a really a great accessible financial position for us to be in, to really partner with us on that. And so I didn't really feel a digital bank as being something that would be good for us to do. But then I reflected on this conversation, and I also serve as civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, and was going down to basic training at Fort Sill quite often. And the reception battalion there, they said that there was 2/3 of young people coming in without a bank, which meant that they had to take them on a field trip to the local financial institution. They would miss training days, and then that would miss paychecks. So I'm like, wow, I think I could do like a digital direct deposit form that could be signed by me and that had their bank information on it. Well, when I talked to Jeffrey about this, he's like, let's collaborate and get this done. So Roger was born, and it's really focused. I was enlisted service member. There's never been a bank that was designed for the entry-level service member that didn't take advantage of them. And I'm throwing credit unions in there as well. Whenever you look at the banks that have targeted entry-level service members or financial services that have, it's fairly heavily weighted on overdraft fees as the revenue source, or payday type of lending activities, which are prevalent. My son is at Fort Sill, and there's 29 check cashing sites that stay open 24/7 to prey upon our young service members. Other military institutions were focused on the officer community and not the enlisted community. And so we thought, well, what if we just at least focus on this entry-level service member, give them high yield checking and savings, no fees, budgeting tools, like what's the most kick-ass bank that we should be giving these service members? And that's what we built. So under 18 can open the accounts. You can use this, any identification that you use to enlist, you can use to open a bank. So we're one of the few, if only, digital banks that allows both the under 18 opening account, but also that tribal cards can be used, or your military ID, which even many digital banks don't allow your military ID to be used to open an account. And we just saw almost too much of acquisition in a very short period of time. In 4 months, we had $80 million of deposits and more than 3,000 accounts that have been opened. So now we're in the mode to try to raise a little bit of capital to be able to make it where we have the growth opportunities to be able to really lean into Roger. And we also found that it was not just this entry-level service member community that needed a better bank. And we saw veterans. My first calls was there was a 90-year-old admiral retired that said he was ready to move all of his accounts to Roger. We were really fortunate that Naval Academy Alumni Association, without any prompting from us, shared it with their entire community that we were opening Roger. And now we're seeing like veteranpreneurs. There's no bank that's really focused on the veteran business owner. And I just feel like I'm so honored to be a veteran, to be a military spouse for 25 years, being mom of 2 active duty service members. And then now thinking I can serve every single one of those communities with our bank using the experience that we have. 100% of our Roger team wore the uniform or is currently wearing it, and 20% of our Citizens Bank staff has as well. So just a really exciting time for us, and we're really honored that we get to launch Roger.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And look, we've talked about AI a little bit, and obviously, Roger is a step in that direction. So there must be some cool use cases for AI for community banks, but also, it's super important, especially, we talked about Mythos and the risks there. How do we think about, managing the risks of AI in terms of, controls over third parties? And, obviously, community banks are not going to build their own AI models, right? They're going to end up using other models. And how do you do that? And also, comply with all the different rules around, privacy and make sure that people in the bank are doing what they're supposed to do with AI and not doing other things like, planning a vacation, right?
Well, and when we talk about AI, the machine learning is still part of that kind of artificial intelligence community of technology. And so you can use pretty advanced machine learning tools that are not going to leak out into the public space. And so we definitely leverage these tools, especially when it comes to fraud prevention. We have unique ways in which we're able to onboard our customers because those tools are available and to be able to ensure that they're not fraudulent representations of an individual. And then also transactional monitoring that can be utilized, especially on the machine learning side. And then I think from an AI standpoint, being able to leverage AI right now for community bankers, it doesn't have to be integrated into your bank processes. It can be used to develop what is our target market for Roger, and really being able to leverage a lot of great tools without having to engage a third party to be able to get a pretty sophisticated endpoint. The same for brochures and things like that, to be able to leverage AI to think about what are the gaps and what I'm not thinking. I think from a strategic advisor, to be able to have it as a right-hand person, not really a person, but not leaking confidential information, but being able to see where's my gap in understanding, what weaknesses am I not anticipating, and having it there to be able to challenge you whenever maybe you don't have the expertise on the team to be able to do so, or you're in learning mode as well, or you're able to upload, say what would this person do, this type of leader, and give them kind of a manifesto of whatever, an article or a book or something like that, to be able to see how different people might approach a problem, so that you're faster, better, and smarter with problem solving than you ever were before.
One of the success stories that I know Jill loves to talk about is our bounce back employees. So there are people that, because of some of the things that were going on at the bank, said, look, I need to move on with my career. But a lot of people have moved back to Citizens Bank of Edmond. You probably have somewhere 70 to 90 employees, 85-ish, something around that. I'm curious, hiring practices have got to have changed a little bit, given the fact that AI is involved. I'm curious, as you look at a candidate, how much do you ask about? How much do you care about? How much do you want to know about how they're currently using AI, whether it's a current bank position or a non-bank position? How important is that as you think about hiring new associates?
Jack, it's such a great question, and how we're handling it is not so directly, but it's about what they're bringing to the table when they get to you. If they don't have incredible research about your organization, then you know that they're not using AI very well, because it's so easy to come so well prepared. And so it's an immediate tell whenever someone's just basically showing up, that they have the arrogance that they don't need to use AI, or that they don't know how to use those tools. And so that just happened to me recently, where someone came in and they really didn't, first of all, they didn't have any questions to ask. They didn't know anything about the organization. And those would have been really easy things to engage with just as a user of AI, just being able to put forth a little bit of effort to have a high degree of preparation. I think also, if you're going into highly analytical type of roles, if someone is going into a financial analyst type of position, or a controller or auditor, and they're not taking your VBPR and dumping it into some AI to be able to engage with, to understand maybe where the weakness and strengths of an organization may be, you really can see that if someone's done that type of work, if they're not willing to do a little bit, then it really is a tell that, wow, this has been really easy to be able to come in here with some really high level questions. So I think it's really changed the expectation of the quality of interviewee that you should be getting, because these tools are available. And you also you can see misspellings that occur on resumes that maybe you used to kind of overlook, especially as society has gotten a little faster. But now it's you can't really overlook those things because it's both not attention to detail and they're not using AI to vet this out. And so, we're not looking for someone that can necessarily use the coding tools right now, but we have those conversations about, how have you experimented with AI? Which one's your favorite one to use just in your personal life? I really, I enjoy when someone has a real learning mentality. I'm going through a data analytics class right now where I'm getting to use different machine learning tools and AI to look at data. And so being able to kind of start some of those conversations is pretty quick to see whether someone is engaged in that community or not. And sometimes they're really not needed, but other times, like for a compliance officer, you would definitely want someone that knows how to engage with these tools so that they can make sure that they're not just leveraging their own expertise, but they're able to go from a variety of different spaces to be able to find the best answer for questions, and even like developing agents and even or at least projects within a certain framework with AI. I think most of the people that we're talking to these days have those tools. And when you're a progressive organization that's leaning into technology, you do seem to have if someone's even not even familiar with AI, they're exploring that because I think they're anticipating that will be part of the discussion.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Look, I think obviously there are organizations that really help community banks lever the power of their community, including the American Bankers Association, the ICBA. How do you think they have been or could really help financial institutions prepare for more artificial intelligence?
Well, I think this is such a great opportunity for the associations, especially to be the player in developing tools that will be relevant for especially community banks. Just touched on compliance a little bit. And I mean, we should be able to at some point have virtual compliance advisors that are centralized from either a cooperative standpoint or the associations coming up with their own, where we can upload every single regulation, compliance requirements, plus the examination manuals, plus any relevant legal activities that have happened, plus banks experiences, and be able to have a place where it's just really easy to ask a compliance to you, and you have this virtual compliance officer that's giving you not only the answer but documentation, what could be the risk of it. It could develop a risk assessment for you about products and services. So I think there's a great opportunity, and we've seen some of this work. I know the Independent Banker Association in Texas is really at the forefront of utilizing some of these collaborative technology opportunities. So that's one. Credit, spreading financials, for instance, I think could be something so easily developed by associations where community banks could be able to engage in a my backyard, fenced off, so that it won't be leaked, but that you could potentially engage with some tool developed by the associations to be able to reduce your reliance on human capital for things that are quite routine or have a standard protocol associated with them, and then be able to use your human capital for the things that make us uniquely community bankers, where we're having the conversation with the person and not just taking information like AI would, but we're learning from their visual cues and the level of anxiety that they're bringing to the table, and the longevity of experience, so that we can utilize that AI output to be able to have the best engagement with our customers. So there's just infinite possibilities, from chief legal officer being centralized at some association that we're subscribing to, compliance, BSA has infinite opportunities to be able to look at our data and identify risk and opportunities to mitigate those risks, as well as how do we report so that we're not having exceptions from a CTR or SAR standpoint. So there's so many things that the associations can do to both make sure awareness is there for community banks, but also to be a source of opportunity for banks that maybe can't develop the AI themselves and really kind of shouldn't, but be able to have a spot where we can leverage AI to be able to really ensure that community banks can be healthy, relevant, sustainable for the long term.
Well, I'll let Alex wrap this up with you, Jill, but I just have one more question. And it's a real practical question. You're a very practical lady. I mean, by the way, what y'all ought to know is getting Jill Castilla on a podcast is a real challenge. She is in huge demand. I mean, this lady was named the American Bankers Community Banker of the Year. She's on the list of the American Bankers Most Powerful Women in Banking, which, by the way, there's about 330 women CEOs. So you're in a very unique category, Jill. But I just have a question. So I'm a community banker, and I'm listening to this, and I'm a community bank CEO or an executive of the bank at a community bank, and I'm thinking, geez, here's a bank that's not quite $500 million in assets. It's doing a lot of great things I should be doing. Tell me, Jill, as a community bank CEO or executive, what's a concrete thing that I should walk away with here? What's one thing I should be thinking about or doing around AI?
So first of all, if you hear someone that you're like, I'm curious about what they're doing, reach out to them. My cell is 405-808-8993. Text anytime. Utilize LinkedIn. Engage on Twitter. Ask the questions because people want to share. I want to share. I want to learn what others are doing. So I think making sure you're not hesitant to reach out to someone that's doing something different, even if it's something you don't want to do, but you're curious about how or why. And those are the best conversations I have, as those that are kind of doubting whether this is something that's important or not. I think also it's being able to be with a growth mindset and kind of reading some books about how do we do hard things and make that part of our daily lives, because the community banking model is really amazing and it's not broken until it breaks. And for many of us, that means that we can go decades without really having a lot of threat to us. But the threat is now and immediate with AI, with the ability, even just changes where new entrants are coming in that are adept in cryptocurrency, the digital blockchain, and AI, that's going to disrupt a lot. And then you touched on as well, Jack, on the threats that are out there and that those are coming at us very quickly. And so we need to make sure that we're engaging to understand that. So I think engaging with one another and then pressing our associations to really that we need to be we need leadership collectively in this area so that we can be competitive for the long term.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the close of our podcast here. So I'd love to hear, Jill, what you're most excited about this year. Obviously, there's AI, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in community banking. So what are you the most excited about?
Yeah, I'm thrilled probably about two things. On the broader scale, the executive order on mortgage relief, I think could be huge. And so I really hope that we're going to see a re-emergence of community banks originating mortgages, and then that dominates our economy, but not non-bank lenders. And then secondly, we're launching Roger Business. And so we're so excited about doing that in the next few weeks. And so to be able to now serve a veteran entrepreneurship community is super exciting for us.
Super exciting. Well, Jill, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so awesome and such a privilege for us, and great to have you. Just congratulations on an awesome career, and really looking forward to hearing more about Roger for Business in the future.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.